Gone are the days of fishing amongst the decaying winter vegetation, for spring is here. Coarse fish now turn their thoughts to spawning, and trout and salmon come into season. Now all seasons have a special appeal, but the angler who puts his rods away to await the opening of the coarse fishing season is going to miss one of the very best times of the year, even though early spring can be savagely cold. Now with the curlews overhead and primroses along the banks, the angler's hours at the waterside are exceptionally lovely. And before long, a sea of bluebells will stand thickly at the water's edge. And with all this, and the warm sun, and the whole day in front of you, fishing for trout, and especially the mighty silver salmon, is an indescribable delight.
Salmon spawn in the headwaters of our rivers during early winter. Their offspring, or parr, look very much like brown trout. But gradually their appearance goes through a significant change. By the time it's 2 years old, the young salmon has taken on a silvery sheen. It's now a smolt, and at this stage it moves down into the estuary, where its body can adjust to a life in salt water. Salmon smolts leave British waters along well-defined migration routes as they travel to the rich feeding grounds south of Iceland. Having spent one winter at sea, the fish then make the decision to either travel on further north or return to our rivers as small salmon known as grills. Those fish that continue the journey will eventually spend anything up to 4 years feeding in the cold waters off Greenland. Only then, as large, mature salmon, will they make the perilous journey home to the rivers of their birth. Inevitably, it's man that poses the greatest threat to the salmon, whether it be from drift nets out at sea or these estuary nets, trapping the fish as they finally make their way into the river. However, a strict season is imposed on the estuary netsmen, hopefully giving more fish a chance of reaching journey's end. Not a bad catch, but it can never match the excitement of fishing with rod and line, even in spring when the salmon can be dour. Well, for our spring salmon fishing, we've come to the River Tweed. This is a mighty river, almost 100 miles long, and it carries an abundance of salmon. And that's due mainly to the magnificent and widespread spawning grounds in both the headwaters of the main river and its many tributaries. And those spawning grounds are very special. They're set at a relatively low altitude, and that means they're not subjected to intense cold in the early spring when the newly hatched salmon are looking for their first food. Now, for the first 70 miles, it's a fast-flowing river. By the time it reaches the pretty town of Kelso, it's become slower and wider. And then as you follow it downstream, the pools become longer and deeper, the rapids fewer and fewer, until eventually the river just simply dissolves into the North Sea along a narrow estuary. Now, from a fishing point of view, the river from source to sea is divided into sections, and the names of those fishings are magical to salmon anglers all over the world. Pavilion, Merton, Floors with its magnificent fly fishing, Henderside, Bergen with its big fish, and this one here, beautiful Tilmouth Park, perhaps one of the finest on the river for both spring and autumn salmon fishing. Stories of Tweed salmon are part of fishing folklore. This is a fisherman's dream, an absolutely splendid salmon that weighed in at just over 42 pounds. Then there's the sort of catch that makes all those blank days at the waterside seem worthwhile. It's little wonder he looks so pleased with himself. The angler can easily become overawed by a big river like the Tweed. But on a stretch like this, it's not so much the size of the water that's the problem, it's the absence of the normal pools and runs that give you a clue as to where the fish might lie. So you need a good gilly, And who better to call on than a man who's worked on this river for over 30 years, Michael Chapman. Morning, Michael.
Good morning, good
Nice to
morning.
see you.
Nice to see you.
Michael, most of the salmon anglers I know, they fish quite small rivers. They can cover all the lies by casting from the bank or most by shallow wading. They'd be absolutely devastated to see the size of this. That's not the case, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, it's not, we've no problems. We've got boats here and that's across the lies, no bother.
Yeah, the salmon do lie in quite narrow stretches, even though the river's wide.
That's right, they're all in confined lies. We know exactly where they are.
Yeah, and you can get the boat across them.
Put the boat over them.
And a fairly short caster.
That's all you need, yes.
Michael, the other thing is that you've got to use a gilly up here, and that's good. What exactly does a gilly do?
Well, he goes out with them for the day and does his best and puts them across the fish. A good companion if you know, enjoy the day.
Advice on flies and...
That's it, on flies and lures and everything.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I'm looking forward to my days fishing here, and I know for sure that I'm going to need all the help and advice I can get.
Well, we'll do our best.
Salmon fishing is quite different from any other form of angling. Many theories have been put forward as to why the salmon should take the angler's fly or lure at all, because when it returns to fresh water, the fish doesn't actually feed. It's the end of February. The water is cold and any fish will be lying deep. I'm spinning a heavyweight bait called a yellow belly. It's an attractive lure as it revolves and deflects through the current.
Okay. Quiet.
What sort of weights do they get to, Michael, the spring? 8, 10 pounds?
I'll average about 8.
Yes.
You get the odd one.
Yes.
14, 15s, you sometimes get a little one of them, but there's never a lot of them.
No.
8 to 10, the average, you can average.
Yes, about average, yes.
It's fishing nicely there, but...
Despite the water rising, it's still fairly clear, isn't it?
Oh, it's still clear enough.
Aye.
Right depth and everything.
Yes. God. Well, well, well. Hey?
What will he be?
What will it be?
Fish, though.
Hey?
He's a fish.
It's a fish. What do I do, Michael? Play it from the bank?
Play it from the... Well, I stay in the boat just now. I'll get into this
okay.
bait done, but...
It's amazing. You can fish all day and it's door and you're thinking about a hot bath and whatnot, then all of a sudden you don't want to go home anymore. It's exciting to see that little flash of silver though. It's coming up right at the side of you. Oh, fresh fish.
He's a sea trout. A fresh sea trout.
A fresh sea trout. That'll teach me to come spring salmon fishing.
He's a sea trout. Well, well.
Well, isn't that magnificent?
Beautiful fish.
Beautiful, isn't it? And you can tell it's a sea trout, what, by the tail, the square,
By the square tail.
Yes. In all other respects, it's very similar to the salmon. An absolutely fresh run.
Fresh run.
Straight in on tide. It's absolutely beautiful. comes to the Yorkshire Dales, this year with unusual coldness. In March, the River Wharfe above Bolton Abbey still wears its sombre winter colours. Early March is a quiet time for the freshwater fishermen, although as we've already seen, some salmon fishing is taking place. But coarse fishing has ended for the time being, and it will be some 3 weeks before I can fish this river for brown trout. But for the river keeper, it's an exceptionally busy time. Working the hatchery now takes second place to work both in the river and along its banks. And all the wildlife of the waterside will benefit from the alterations that have been made. Winter storms and floods litter the bankside vegetation with debris, and it needs constant removal. The wild mink, they're vicious predators. They prey on birds, small animals and of course fish, often killing even without the need to eat. So it's essential to keep their numbers under control, which the river keeper does simply by trapping them. Naturally, a number of fish-eating animals and birds must be tolerated. But the main worry comes from the ecological threat posed by pollution. As a river keeper, David Hunt knows as well as anybody the chaos it can cause.
You have to be ever vigilant for pollution from whichever source it might come from, which can be farm pollution, silage or slurry, to an accidental pollution from a road accident.
What sort of effect would that have on the river?
Well, those particular ones are devastating. They wipe everything out. And we can put the fish back straight away, but it's the aquatic life that takes many years to re-establish itself.
During winter and early spring, the Wharfe, like all spate rivers, is subject to ferocious floods. In the upper reaches, these floods tend to run off quite quickly, and they leave behind vast amounts of gravel. However, this gravel builds up in certain parts of the river to produce long, shallow, featureless stretches of water. But the real problem here occurs when dry weather causes the water levels to drop, and much of the gravel where I'm standing at the moment becomes exposed to both the sun and the wind, and this effectively kills any aquatic insects that are trying to establish a home here. But we can change all that with a few well-positioned boulders placed in the riverbed. And the action of the water sweeping between the boulders scars out deep pools of quiet water which become a home for both insects and fish. Now this little scheme here of a few boulders is a perfect example of the river keeper and nature working hand in hand to transform a dead stretch of the river into one that in a couple of years' time will be teeming with life. Trees by the water's edge add character and colour, but they also have another role to play. The extensive root systems belonging to alders, willows and sycamores help bind the riverbank and protect it from the erosion caused by winter flooding. But they mustn't be allowed to get out of hand, and it's part of the river keeper's job to carry out a programme of thinning, removal and replanting. Over the next few weeks, keepers will be stocking their waters with sizable trout that have been raised in the hatchery. It's an expensive but very necessary business. But little streams like this are the natural hatchery for the river, and as such the keeper will protect them because they provide him with a cheap supply of wild fish. Now the newly hatched brown trout are leaving the gravel beds to find quieter waters. This spot is ideal. Clean, well-oxygenated water and a first-class supply of food. And under these conditions, the little fish will grow very quickly. And when autumn comes, nature will nudge them down into the main river to leave this stream completely clear for next year's spawning. As late March approaches, fly fishing for trout commences. Now the trout's feeding habits are almost entirely carnivorous, and aquatic insects provide it with much of the food that it needs to eat if it's going to grow and spawn successfully. Now there are literally dozens of different species of aquatic insects. Some of them are more prolific and widespread than others, but they all have one thing in common. They spend most of their lives underwater as nymphs or larvae. And then at a certain specific and limited time of the year, the time depending upon the species of insect, the nymph is drawn towards the surface of the water where it hatches out into the first stage of the fly cycle. And that event signals to the trout that a rich and prolific period of feeding is about to commence, as millions of these insects simultaneously make the perilous journey between water and air. Now, on our northern rain-fed rivers, this fly, the large dark olive, is very prolific in the early spring. And as the nymph struggles towards the surface, battling against the current, the trout sees it as a coloured, animated shape. And I match that event with this artificial fly, which I fish below the surface. It's roughly the same shape and colour, but it has movement. And at this stage, we're more likely to deceive the trout with movement than exact imitation. But once the flies are hatching and floating on the surface, stretching and drying their wings, I have to change to this fly. It floats, it has no movement, but it's a thoughtful imitation of the natural fly. By the banks of the River Wharfe, new life is emerging. Winter has finally retreated. And for the angler, it's the end of weeks of careful preparation and anxious waiting. Well, this is one of the exciting moments in the season as far as I'm concerned. It's the opening of brown trout fishing, and I'm going to start by fishing this pool here. What I've got is I've got shallow water there, so there's no fish there. There's a deep, strong current through the middle. Well, that's too cold at this time of year for there to be any fish there. And if there are any fish in this pool, they're likely to be in that rather sheltered water along the side of the trees there and actually under the branches themselves. And over there, it's quite deep. There are two reasonably deep pools, one on that side of the tree and then one beyond it. So I'm going to start by fishing those two little pools. Now, it's important in spring to fish your pools very quickly. Don't hang about, get down and get them fished, and then you can come back to them later on in the day. It's a typical early spring day, cold and damp, the sort of conditions where you really have to work hard to catch a fish. Heavy rain falling on the hills soon causes the river to rise, and as the fish move into quieter backwaters, I try a change of position. Fish the flies right up to the end of the rod, because fish can be very close to your feet in these conditions. They can be almost just there. There's a fish following the fly. Come on, take. Take. It's turned away. I've just got my eye on this little bit under the bank here and just seen one fish move, and it's only a foot out from the bank. It's an incredible place, but it may just have gone in there to be out of the floodwater. And there we are. I saw him move. It was marvellous, was that snag. I don't think he's a very big fish, but that was exciting. Gently does it. Beautiful. What a beautiful fish. And that's a wild fish. And how can I tell it's a wild fish? Well, if it had been one of last year's stock fish, it would have been much larger. So that little fish there has been born and bred in this river. And look at the beautiful gold colouring on it, all down underneath it, the bright red spots and the black ones along the back. And those fins, magnificent they are. That fish is in perfect condition for this time of year. Warm, blossomy May has now taken full possession of the countryside, and the river banks are awash with the sights and sounds of spring at its peak. The water's now teeming with insect life, and the trout are feeding freely.
I've come to a pool, a big pool on this river. It really is quite large for the size of river. It's where one of the smaller tributaries of the river meets the main river, and it's formed a very deep pool here. Now there's one or two fish rising here, so we'll see how we go on. Fish are moving all along that edge there. They wait in the quieter water to the side of the fast water, watch the insects come down the fast water, then just simply move sideways and take them. And there we are, that's the first one. Keep out of sight, don't stand up, otherwise you'll frighten all the feeding fish. I'm trying to get it round into the quieter water here, away from the fish that are feeding. My word, that fish can move. And you see, it can make all the disturbance it wants there. It's not going to concern the other fish. And bring it slowly to the net. There it is. Nice half-pound trout. Lightly hooked. As you can see, just lightly hooked there. And it's so simple just to ease that hook out. And that's it. And I think I'll pop that fish back. I've come across this pool because a lot of insects, the wind's freshened and a lot of insects are now being blown off the bank onto the water. They're not aquatic insects, they're cow dung flies, all sorts of little beetles and things that are being carried onto the water by the wind, and it's produced quite a rise of trout here. I've changed my flies to match what I think are the land-based fly, a cow dung fly, a hawthorn fly. I'm just going to see if I can tempt what I think are the larger fish in this pool, which are in this very sheltered water under the bank. Well, in addition to the flies that still are being blown off the land, we're now getting a tremendous hatch of medium olives. Those are aquatic insects. The nymphs have come up struggled through the surface of the water. The trout were feeding on them earlier. Now they've got out and they're beginning to hatch vast amounts of medium olives. Whoa, and that's a fish. My word. That's why this time of the year they're extremely fit. They're feeding well at the moment and they're extremely agile and powerful. There it is. A fine trout caught on a land-bred fly. When river levels drop and bright sunshine searches the crystal clear water, daytime fly fishing becomes increasingly ineffective. But the old North Country trout fishermen developed a method to overcome these conditions: upstream worming. The angler uses conventional fly fishing tackle but casts out a worm instead of an artificial fly. It's a skillful and often deadly technique. We'll put a worm on. The worms have been scarred in this moss, kept in this moss for about 7 to 10 days. They work their way through the moss and then back again, and they become very tough, so they resist the casting. They also go a beautiful, delicate pink colour. No point in digging the worms straight out of the garden and using them. You've got to prepare them properly, otherwise they'll be too soft
and every time you cast, the worm will come off. You put one hook in just below the head, one hook down by the tail, and then the worm is presented quite naturally. It looks as though it's just a long worm. The hook hasn't bent it, distorted it. It's presented naturally. Beautiful. A lot of people find that casting the worm is the difficult part. You've got to forget the normal conventional method of casting a fly, which is far too severe. You'd simply pull the worm off the hook. A gentle backwards and forwards action works very well. I like to do this roll cast. I just allow the worm to come back towards me, and then when it gets just in front of me, I just roll cast it forwards. Just a nice gentle roll cast, and I can cast it about 10 yards, which is plenty far enough. That's it, I saw it this time. Just taking it round. The fish just moves up and intercepts the worm, and you do have difficulty seeing it on an overcast day. There it is, ready for the net, and I got it. Beautiful. And there were more to come. The results of a superb day. Spring trout fishing at its very best. Normally, I like to keep a record of both the length and the weight of all the fish that I keep. But in the case of one of the fish I caught today, I'd like to go a stage further and try and determine its age. Now, to do that, I take a sample of scales from that area of the fish, clean them and put them under the microscope. It's quite a simple operation. But by looking through the microscope at a scale, I can determine both the age and the growth rate of this particular fish. The growth of a fish is recorded as rings on its scales. These rings form well-defined zones. Summer zone rings are spaced wide apart, reflecting good growth, whilst those in the winter zone are much closer together, showing little growth. The combination of the two represents 1 year in the life of the fish. My little trout turned out to be just over 4 years old. This beautiful little stream is one of the many tributaries of the River Wharfe, which bring rainwater from the surrounding hills to the valley bottom. It's a cold stream made up of boulders, gravel beds and tumbling currents. And in all these sparkling runs and sunlit pools, there are wild brown trout. They're shy, wily creatures, and I've spent many happy hours trying to catch them. Spring is an exciting season in which to fish. The landscape alters dramatically during this period, and the passage of time has no importance to the angler. It's a magical period. But eventually a day comes when the hot sun and scented grasses suggest that spring is over and summer fishing is about to begin.
And that summer fishing with Derek Law can be seen at 11:30 tomorrow.